Hello. Rob just asked if he wanted him to introduce me, and I said no, so I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Alice. I'm a software developer at Readify, and today I'm going to be talking to you all about this idea of creative coding, and particularly in relationship to the JavaScript canvas. Now, to start off with, why do we care about this? Who am I? What's going on? So, as I said before, I'm Alice and I'm a developer. But in my spare time, I'm also an artist, and I do a lot of creative visual work, which is usually in very traditional mediums like paint. I don't know, not the computer paint, that one. And when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, this was a bit problematic when it came to school, because I found that in the syllabus it was really hard to do an art class and a computer class at the same time. The syllabus was just not set up for you to do those two courses, because they're like, well, you know, computer programming, it's in the scientific half of the syllabus, and then there's art, and that's in the creative, you know, the left brain side of things. And so the idea of someone wanting to do both of those things at the same time in our education system was viewed as like a bit weird. Sorry, I think my hair's touching that a bit. So I'm really keen through my work and through other avenues to really promote this idea that those really aren't two different things. They actually can sit quite closely together. Now, I should clarify that I think there are a lot of really useful talks here today that I know I've picked up some things and I'm like, I'm going to take this back to my work next week and start incorporating it. It's going to be really useful and that kind of thing. This is not particularly useful. It's just kind of cool. I find it entertaining. I don't know. So this is just going to be a basic introduction to the JavaScript canvas and some ways you can make some really simple art visualizations using it. These aren't going to be very advanced. These are just the basic tools that you might like to use, and then you can really take that in any direction. So this is an example of a very, very simple canvas element with a very simple illustration on it. It's a cube. It's not very interesting. All I've done here is locate the canvas and draw a rectangle on it. So pretty much all we can do with the canvas is we can draw squares on it, we can draw circles on it, we can draw lines, and we can make those things different colors. I think one of the reasons I enjoy this medium so much is because there's not really a complicated framework to interact with it. You can draw points on a screen, and you can put those points where you want to put them. There's not really anything more to it than that. So I think probably the first interesting thing you can do with this kind of frame is to introduce animation to it. So there are probably two components to this that I should explain. Firstly, we're using time here to position something on the screen. And secondly, we're requesting a frame from your browser and saying, hey, you know, give me a frame. You notice that I could write this function within a loop and say 60 times a second, can you please supply a frame? But I think it's better to request the frame, and then the browser can actually, you know, if you're like, hey, Chrome, give me some frames, and Chrome's like, no, I have 500 tabs open. I don't have any power to do that. It's fine. Like, so you'll notice if you put that in a loop that runs at a set period of time, you can kind of have some really bad performance issues with your browser, which is probably not super respectful of your users who might be viewing your animation. It might be a bit problematic for them. The other problem with this initial animation is, so I animated a cube, and I don't know where it's gone. It's like over there, because that's not bounded by anything. So it's pretty easy to add some simple constraints so that that would keep within the confines of the canvas that you're drawing on. So here it's just modded by the width of the canvas, which produces a pretty boring animation of a cube rotating. Well, I mean, speeding through space is not particularly interesting. But through chucking in some other elements, so here I've just introduced a simple sine wave to figure out where it sits on the y-axis, we can make that movement feel a lot more natural and a bit more engaging to the eye. What I think is interesting about working with these kinds of formulas is that you can kind of create something of I would say a personality. Maybe that's just me, but there's something about the way that certain, like particularly like I find sine and cosine waves move. It's very pleasing to the eye, and it's very engaging in a way that just a linear movement back and forward is not. Now, at the start of my talk, I promised that this would not be interesting or financially useful in any way. I do think that learning how to illustrate things in a way that's engaging to a user or someone watching it can actually be quite useful when you're designing websites and other applications. I have a friend that kind of refused to stop using Facebook Messenger because he really likes the way when you click on the little, like you tap the little emoji in the bottom right corner, it expands and then it pops, and he's like, yeah, I just really like doing that. I don't want to leave. So a simple little animation like that can actually generate value. I don't know if this is going to generate any value for anyone. It's not very interesting. So one thing I've been doing with these simple illustrations is clearing the canvas away every frame. Now, that's not the default behavior of the canvas, and if you don't do that, you can start to notice some weird things, some weird patterns emerging pretty quickly. But because I'm not styling this element in any way, it is not super engaging either, especially because pretty soon we're not going to be able to see anything because that's going to cover our whole canvas. So luckily, we can use a fill style to programmatically decide on our color in the same way that we are programmatically deciding where our element sits on the screen. Here you can see, you know when I mentioned before that we're requesting the frame from the browser? So if that frame was being supplied 60 times a millisecond, we'd see a much smoother line, but those little jitters are just due to my browser probably having too many tabs open. Now, this is just a single element being drawn per frame. In my mind, one of the really cool things about the canvas element is that because it's so cheap to draw rectangles, particularly rectangles, you can draw other shapes as well, but a rectangle is quite a cheap shape to draw. You can actually draw up to probably, I would say about 60,000 different objects per second. Here I'm not drawing that many, it's only, what is that? It'd be about 600 a second. And you can use that to create, for lack of a better word, psychedelic vomit? I don't know. Like I say, this isn't really for anything. It's just mucking around with JavaScript and mucking around with the canvas. But to be honest, I think the idea of mucking around with coding is quite valuable. And often when I am teaching programming to people for the first time, which I sometimes go out to schools and I sometimes teach people who otherwise wouldn't be interested in programming about some basics, I find when you can introduce visual elements and the concept of play into programming, it becomes a much more interesting, intriguing thing to learn. So I promised it wouldn't be at all useful, but there are two use cases that I've outlined here that might be good. So for the second part of my talk, I just wanted to show an application that I have used this for, and I would like everyone to just cross your fingers and toes for the live demo gods because this may not work. I have a video if it doesn't, but we'll see how we go. Come on, little guy. Doot, 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 doot. Luckily, because I have no faith in the live demo gods, I prepared a beautiful video of my demonstration working. And so if you would all suspend disbelief and pretend that this is completely live. So this visualization here, in a slightly alternative universe where this just connected perfectly to my projector, is actually taking a reading from this headset, which is a pretty boring reading. Maybe it's actually come up since then. No, it hasn't. But it's taken a pretty uninteresting reading. It's about 8 different levels of EEG data, which are often referred to as like brainwave data. And I've used that to just project it onto the canvas using the techniques that I talked about before. So there's simple techniques of just positioning different dots and shapes on a canvas. And then instead of time data, instead what I've done is projected my own brain data onto a canvas to come up with some weird looking things. Now, a couple of caveats about this. I built this as a kind of prototype to experiment with this kind of technology. This particular headset, aside from not connecting to computers during live demos, is also not, the quality of the reading is not particularly, high fidelity. So there are versions of this technology that give you a precise enough reading that you can apply machine learning to it and move a cursor around a screen, for instance. I actually read a headline the other day that some researchers have transcribed thought to text for the first time using EEG headsets and machine learning, which I don't know about you, I actually find that quite terrifying because I kind of like my thoughts, for the most part, being inside my own mind rather than, I don't know, on Facebook. But I feel like because this prototype is much more artistic in its implementation, it's not really supposed to be a super scientific thing that is perfectly reading my emotion levels. If I had a live demonstration up and running, I could show you if I'm walking around the stage and if I'm gesturing, then it will become quite active. And if I'm sort of sitting there quietly, it will become less active. And I kind of ask someone to like say boo at me halfway through and it will like go pretty crazy. But, you know, down to like the level that I guess where you could actually use it to issue commands or that kind of thing, this hardware is just not that precise. Then again, I did get this for free, and even if you bought it, they're only about $90. So I wouldn't make any scientific claims or anything on that kind of headset. In fact, on their website, they're explicitly like, don't use this for medical purposes. So don't do that. So again, if it's not for producing any kind of scientific output, if we're not making anything useful with it, then why bother? The main reason I built this was to trick children into thinking that computer science was cool and that they might want to study it at uni, with mixed results, really. It's really hard to trick children into thinking anything is cool. But it's mainly to illustrate this concept that I talked about at the start of my speech, which is that I don't really think that you have scientific mathematical things, computer science on one side, and then artistic pursuits on the other. I think human beings are good at lots of different things, and sometimes it's really fun to combine those together and come up with some interesting results. Because I go out to schools and I talk about this technology, I asked the classroom of people, these young girls who are about 14, I said, does anyone here do two different things like I do? I do programming, I do art. Does anyone do two different things? And I got some really interesting results. One girl was like, I play the violin and I do boxing. And I was like, cool. Not going to cross you, that's fine. So what I'd really like to see going forward is people bringing in some more diverse skill sets into computer programming, because I think there are some really interesting ways that you can combine different skills with a programmatical application. It doesn't always result in something that's necessarily going to earn money, but sometimes it's just cool. And I think that's kind of fun, maybe. I don't know, it's just me. I think I only ran for about 15 minutes, so if anyone has any questions, that would be lovely, I guess. No. Ooh, yes.
So I work with a platform that sort of helps educate children about the climate change and does difference to that. Do you see things like this as a way to get more young people into coding and programming and software development?
I try so many ways to get children into coding. What I found really interesting, when I go and talk to kids, and if you ask them about what are you thinking about technology and what are you scared of and how do you feel about stuff, they're already thinking really deeply about a lot of questions. They're thinking about climate change and they're thinking about AI and stuff like that. I went to a school and I was like, oh, what are you worried about with technology? And this little boy was like, what if I go to uni and I study really hard, but then when I finish, a robot does my job? And I was like, next question, please. And another kid was like, so is robots taking everyone's job? Is that going to be really good because we won't have to do any work? Or will it be really bad because no one will have jobs? And I was like, yes, that is what will happen. So in terms of climate change, I definitely hear kids like talking about these two concepts. there are lots of different ways to get young people into coding, and I don't always know what has the best hit rate. Like, I have a lot of enthusiasm for it. I don't always know if it lands. I found one of the most engaging things you can do is introduce a use for what they're building, whether that's something to do with a big global cause or if it's just something that they can use in their day-to-day life. I went out to mentor some kids near Rockingham, and we just showed them how to make like a basic HTML page. And I was worried they weren't going to understand the concept, but within 5 minutes, someone had made his like top 10 Fortnite facts page. So maybe we could redirect some of that energy towards some important global issues. I don't know. But yeah, to answer your question, if I knew how to make kids do programming, I would tell you, I'd tell everyone, but it's a bit of a mixed bag.
We have time for a couple of more questions.
Come on, ask me questions.
It's really actually good to see that how beautiful it is, and the directly idea actually come out from the first talk is from the web API. You can actually integrate with the speaker, and in my mind it's like you can directly do some like musical visualization directly on the website that potentially can help the kids. I think the combination of arts and the computer science, it just displays such a beautiful and a simple way. That's, this is not a question, but just just a direct feedback, and I just want to give to you. Yeah, it's really beautiful. Yeah, thank you.
No worries. I think it is like making it something that people can interact with in different ways really grabs people's attention. So whether that's through music or through them moving around in front of something or putting a headset on, they find it very engaging. So it's pretty cool to me anyway. I don't know about anyone else.
Whoa. How am I going to do this one? Seems I'm just barging straight through. Sorry, dude.
Hi. So you're pretty multidisciplinarily skilled, I think. But I'd say quite a lot of people are quite specific in their domains of knowledge. And there's often a difficulty in connecting the arts with engineering fields and scientific fields. Do you have any thoughts on avenues of approach which involve connecting artists with programmers rather than artists who are programmers or programmers who are artists, sort of like ways to encourage collaboration and stuff like that?
Yeah, one thing that I try and do with my limited spare time is a bit of mentoring in the community and teaching people about programming. And I also have a lot of friends that they're creators. They love to make stuff and build things. And I definitely have a lot of plans in my mind about like, okay, how can we teach those creators how to use programming to put some of those ideas into practice? Practically, I can only run so many workshops, but it's definitely, I've felt in the Perth art community and in the Perth performing arts community and music communities, there is a big, when I talk about this stuff, people are so interested. So I think to answer your question is I need to run stuff and invite weirdo creator types that I know and encourage them to dip their toe in this whole field. I think it's a bit, I think it's not quite a matter of I don't want to necessarily force computer programmers to be oh, you have to become more artistic or more musical. It's more that I want to make programming seem more approachable so people from lots of different backgrounds can try it out and do different things. Although, if people want to do art, I'm go for it. Everyone should do art. It's really fun.
Thank you so much, Alice. Please join me for one last round of applause. Thank you.